My mother-in-law never held back her criticisms about my job and educational background. The tension escalated dramatically when she unexpectedly spilled hot tea on me. Though I was fortunate to escape injury, the severity of her actions left me shocked. I couldn't comprehend why she acted so violently, especially considering it was my husband, Charles, who was unemployed, not me. Frustrated by her unreasonable behavior, I declared firmly, "Enough is enough. If this is how you want it, I have no choice but to leave." To my surprise, my mother-in-law appeared almost pleased with my decision, showing no remorse. Fed up with the toxic environment, I decided to move back to my parents' house. Little did she know, I had been the primary financial supporter of our household, making around $50,000 a month through stock trading after resigning from my previous job. Despite being forced out, I felt confident in my ability to sustain myself. Charles and I had started our relationship in college, both studying economics with dreams of thriving in finance. After we landed jobs at different brokerage firms, he proposed, and I eagerly accepted, envisioning a bright future together. However, our plans shifted when Charles asked me to leave my job and move in with him and his mother after his father passed away. Initially hesitant, I eventually agreed, hoping it wouldn't become a burden. But with everything that had transpired, I was left regretting my decision and resolved never to help my mother-in-law again, even amidst her financial struggles. After losing his father in middle school, Charles became his mother's only support, a responsibility I respected and understood. Thus, when we moved into Charles's family home 3 weeks later, I thought I was doing the right thing. While his mother seemed pleased at first, her demeanor quickly soured as she directed her cold, disapproving gaze at me. Despite feeling unwelcome, I tried to remain optimistic, dismissing her faint mutterings that I couldn't quite hear. Living with her soon proved to be more challenging than I anticipated. One morning, I was jolted awake by her demanding voice at 5 a.m., ordering me to make breakfast. "Don't just lay around because you're not working," she scolded sharply. It felt ridiculous, but I didn't argue and set to work, enduring her constant critiques about my speed and efficiency. After what felt like an eternity, I finally served breakfast in just 25 minutes. When I apologized for the delay, she responded with more complaints, this time about the soup being too salty, which I honestly didn't think it was. "What are you saying? Are you trying to poison me with such salty meals?" she accused. Stunned, I couldn't help but wonder what her motives were. Gathering my courage, I asked, "Why are you so harsh on me?" "What do you mean? I don't think I'm being harsh. Are you trying to make me the bad guy?" she retorted. "That's not what I meant," I replied, overwhelmed by her relentless pressure. "Finish eating and start cleaning. After that, there's laundry, so no time to rest," she commanded. From that point on, every day felt like an unending barrage of criticism and chores that drained me mentally and physically. As I cleaned, she would point out, "You missed the dust in the corner," and while doing laundry, she'd complain, "There's still a stain." About a month into our living arrangement, I reached a breaking point and decided to speak to Charles. "It's about your mother," I began cautiously. "She's been very critical every day, and it's becoming unbearable for me. Could you please ask her to ease up?" To my dismay, Charles offered no response, which frustrated me, but then I noticed his pale complexion, as if he were burdened by something heavy. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" I probed. After a moment of hesitation, Charles finally confessed, "I've been fired from the company." I was stunned, struggling to process his words. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, it's not," he replied. "Due to an economic downturn, the company had to downsize, and I was laid off." "So you'll be unemployed starting tomorrow?" I asked. "Actually, I can work for another month after receiving my notice, but after that," he paused, then added, "I've been trading stocks using the knowledge I gained at my previous job. It was tough at first, but now I'm earning about $50,000 a month, so we're not struggling financially." I comforted Charles and momentarily forgot about my mother-in-law's torment. The next day, however, I found myself enduring her harsh treatment while Charles adjusted to his new reality. Feeling the need to stay strong and support him, I pressed on. A month passed, and Charles officially became unemployed. Initially, he began searching for a new job, but gradually he spent more time at home, crafting excuses instead. Shouldn't you start looking for a job more seriously? I suggested, hoping to encourage Charles to find a new direction. I'm looking, but it's tough to find a good company that fits me, he replied, his tone lacking urgency or determination. Reluctantly, I continued to shoulder the financial burden for both of us. As time passed, my mother-in-law's hostility intensified, and I felt increasingly drained each day. Initially, I told myself I had to endure it because Charles was out of work, but that justification began to wear thin. My days melted into a haze of monotony. One morning, in a rare moment, Charles left the house early, perhaps finally ready to embark on a serious job hunt. After he departed, I started my usual chores. Make sure it's clean. Do it right. My mother-in-law nagged from her perch on the living room sofa, sipping tea and hurling sarcastic remarks my way. Fed up, I chose to ignore her. Suddenly, her temper flared. How dare you ignore me? You're just a daughter-in-law, and you don't even have a job. I continued my cleaning, trying to drown out her venomous words. Her anger escalated as she yelled, "Still ignoring me? Unemployed and uneducated people like you should leave this house." In a fit of rage, she threw her hot tea at me. "It's hot. Please stop," I cried out instinctively, shocked by her sudden aggression. Luckily, the tea wasn't boiling, so I escaped serious burns, but the situation could have turned disastrous. She coldly retorted, "This is what I've been saying, if you're not working, leave this house." Her smirk sent chills down my spine. Exhausted by her unrelenting hostility, I felt I had no choice but to comply with her demand. "Fine, I'll leave." "Good, that makes things easier. Leave quickly," she snapped. I hurriedly packed my belongings, determined to escape the toxic environment. Without hesitation, I headed straight to my parents' home. When I arrived, my parents were taken aback by my sudden visit but welcomed me with open arms. I waited anxiously for a call from Charles, but it never came. No calls, no messages. As the silence stretched on, I felt a growing sense of isolation. I decided not to reach out to Charles until he contacted me first. A month passed since I returned to my parents' home, but still, there was no word from him. My affection for him began to wane, and thoughts of divorce crept into my mind. Then, one early morning, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I checked the monitor, I was shocked to see both Charles and my mother-in-law standing outside. "What now?" I muttered, bewildered by their sudden appearance after all this time. "Yes, what can I do for you?" I asked through the intercom. "I've forgiven you. Now come back home," my mother-in-law shouted, her voice as harsh as ever. "Forgiven me? What are you talking about?" I replied, utterly confused. I hadn't done anything to warrant forgiveness from her. After expressing my bewilderment, I ended the intercom call, frustration boiling inside me at her presumptuousness. But they didn't leave. Instead, they started banging on the front door. "Don't just hang up on me. Let us in," my mother-in-law yelled, her voice echoing with urgency and irritation. Worried their loud commotion might disturb the neighbors, I reluctantly opened the door and invited them inside. After seating them on the living room sofa, I asked why they were here, especially since it had been my mother-in-law who insisted I leave in the first place. The whole situation felt surreal. "You're the one who told me to leave. I can't just go back now," I asserted, frustration evident in my tone. She accused me of being childish and reiterated that she had forgiven me, insisting I return to her home. She even said she would allow an unemployed and uneducated person like me to stay there. "But I'm not the unemployed one. Charles is. If I go back, you'll just take advantage of me again." "What about your son?" I retorted, hoping to make her see reason. Charles seemed taken aback by this revelation, and my mother-in-law looked confused, clearly unaware that Charles hadn't informed her of his job loss. After some hesitation, Charles finally admitted he had been laid off. Apologies and justifications followed, with him trying to rationalize his silence by relying on my income for stability. My mother-in-law, shocked by the news, expressed her anger toward Charles for not actively seeking employment. "Why did you keep quiet about this? What are we going to do now?" she scolded him. Charles assured her that my income would be sufficient for the time being, which only caused her to berate him further for not being proactive in his job search. Frustrated with Charles's excuses and the entire ordeal, I couldn't believe they expected me to just return as if nothing had happened. When my mother-in-law suggested I come back, I firmly refused, recalling all the mistreatment I had endured. Their unexpected visit quickly spiraled into a heated argument, especially when the incident involving the hot tea came to light. Charles was horrified to learn what had happened and confronted his mother. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. She admitted that her actions stemmed from my ignoring her, which ignited a fierce exchange between them. I intervened, suggesting they take their dispute back to their home, highlighting the discomfort their loud arguing caused in someone else's space. My intervention seemed to soften their approach, previously assertive and domineering. They now pleaded with me to return, promising no further trouble. Yet, I saw through their empty assurances. Charles's promise to find a job seemed insincere, and my mother-in-law's vow to stop causing chaos felt equally unreliable. I voiced my skepticism, making it clear I believed their promises were hollow and that they would likely take advantage of me again. The silence that followed confirmed my doubts. Leaving them in the living room, I retreated to my room to collect my thoughts. When I returned 10 minutes later, I found them still seated in silence, their heads bowed in contemplation. Frustrated by their quietude, I broke the stillness. "How long are you planning to stay silent? It doesn't matter to me anymore." Rather than engaging in conversation, I took decisive action. I handed Charles a document I had prepared in advance, a pre-filled divorce form with my signature already on it. Charles looked at the document, utterly bewildered. "Can't you see? It's a divorce form. I'm done with someone who won't find a job and didn't even bother to contact me after I returned to my parents' house," I explained bluntly. "Don't. Wait, please. This is too sudden," he protested. His stubbornness only fueled my irritation. He seemed oblivious to how his actions had brought us to this point. Unmoved by his pleas, I stood firm in my decision, ready to move on from the turmoil that had overshadowed my life for too long. I had made up my mind. My decision to divorce Charles was final, and nothing he could say would change that. Still in shock, Charles questioned whether the divorce was too harsh. "I don't think so. It's your fault," I responded, directing the same sternness toward my mother-in-law, who shared the blame for our predicament. Resigned, Charles signed the divorce papers, cautioning me not to regret my decision. However, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, confident that the one who would come to regret this would not be me, but Charles. "I'll submit the divorce papers. I don't want any compensation. Just go home," I declared, finalizing my separation from Charles. Although it might have seemed harsh, distancing myself was essential to escape the constant harassment from my mother-in-law and the strain of Charles's unemployment. 3 weeks later, while enjoying a quiet day at my parents' house, I received an unexpected call from my former mother-in-law. She informed me that the electricity and gas had been cut off at her house and insinuated that I might have had something to do with it. I explained that since the divorce, I had stopped covering Charles's and her living expenses. Desperate for help, she asked if I could pay just for that month. I found the request absurd, given that we were no longer related and I didn't live there anymore. I firmly declined, suggesting she ask Charles for assistance since he had promised to find a job. Unable to accept my refusal, she pleaded for help, trying to appeal to our past as ex-in-laws. However, I remained resolute, ending the call and blocking her number to avoid any further entanglements. At last, I had severed ties with both my ex-mother-in-law, who had harassed me relentlessly, and Charles, who had proven himself unreliable. Life at my parents' house gradually became peaceful, a stark contrast to the tumultuous times I had left behind. I began to embrace a newfound sense of tranquility and freedom, relieved to be distanced from such a toxic environment. Several months later, while enjoying a holiday, checking stock charts, and relishing the calm of my new routine, I received an unexpected message from Charles. In it, he apologized for everything, acknowledging his past reliance on me and mentioning that he had recently found employment at a factory. Despite his apology, I felt no desire to re-engage with that part of my life. Charles wrote about his mother's continued harsh behavior and expressed a wish for me to come back. However, as I read his message, I was convinced that reconciliation was off the table. I decided to block Charles's number, choosing to permanently close that door. 8 months post-divorce, Life took a positive turn when a friend introduced me to a new man. He was dependable and treated me with the respect I deserved. Despite our age difference, we found a strong connection. While we weren't rushing toward marriage, I cherished the happy moments we shared. He brought a sense of joy and stability that I had long missed, allowing me to focus on the present and leave my troubled past behind. With him, I began to truly rebuild my life.